Microsoft just dropped the patch notes for the update that's going to be dropping alongside the upcoming DLC, U-Phase Legacy for Age of Empires 4. We're going to dig through it and tell you what to look forward to, some cool new features that maybe aren't going to get enough attention until people figure them out, and weirdly enough, some civs that probably should have been nerfed and haven't. Let's get into it. All right, hey guys, KillerPigeon here. We're going to be going through this. We're going to jump straight down to the build spotlight type area. Just go up here. So first of all, we've got new maps coming. There's new map rotation. This people have their own personal opinions on. I think Archipelago being back is probably not going to be something many people look forward to. Waterholes may be a bit questionable. But the overall direction for this map pool, at least it's a little bit fresh. At least it's a little bit something new. I think the big thing that just continues to be frustrating is that we're not seeing the map pool rotate frequently enough. So hopefully, finally, after all these years, Microsoft takes that to heart and does something about it. But we have got some cool new maps coming in. So first of all is Ascension. This is going to be the second time they're going to add a map in that's going to have a waterfall effect because, of course, you already have Rocky River. This one seems like it's designed around team play, and there's going to be this focus on moving up the map to get towards the gold. I do like these designs. It means you can't just camp in the corner as long, although I will admit for casuals, the idea of being able to camp in the corner usually is more appealing. It's more the pro level that you don't want to allow that at. So with this looking like it's a team-oriented map, I'm not sure it's going to be the biggest hit. The last DLC had this a bit, where there's some cool concepts in there, but they weren't designed for 1v1 play. So Fangs, we've got jagged mountains rising up the sky as surrounded by dense wood. So this kind of sounds like we're going to have this situation of just, central wood deposits that you play around. And also, it looks like we're only going to be getting one sacred site. Sorry, no, 2, 3. Yeah, we are getting the 3 in the corner. I'm hoping this is the case of the players spawn in the southwest and northeast, so the sacred site win condition is feasible. But it looks like the goal here is for them to really focus on wolf ambushing. I think maybe this is the devs' attempt to actually make wolves valid, because over time they've been losing validity, and a lot of players at this point are just frustrated they even exist in the game. Now, this one I'm intrigued by. Snake River, there is going to be fishing, but it looks like it's a little bit of a Mongolian Heights style map. Spawn-wise, I'm not sure. I assume you're going to be spawning up here and down here to balance things out. But what I'm really hoping for, there was a sick-looking screenshot in the DLC's store page. I'm hoping it's this. I'm hoping the thing with Snake River is they figured out a way to have the maps randomly generate with this style of terrain, because this is very clearly a crafted map. Fingers crossed that I'm wrong and this was actually just a generated map, because that is a cool effect. And I think that's the type of thing that we need to see more of with the maps in Age of Empires 4 to keep people engaged. And then finally, Westlake. I like this idea. So the idea of Westlake is that it's going to have shallow water. You can walk to the sacred site, but I'm assuming there's not going to be any room to drop castles. I think that is a really smart idea. The only negative is it looks like they're doing a triple sacred site design. I think this would be probably much cooler as maybe a singular sacred site design. Just because I'm thinking of like the situation where this could have been the remedy to King of the Hill. If anyone has played that, they know what happens. Someone takes the central sacred site, they start building castles, and then you can't win the game. Now, it looks like they are going to be making changes to sheep distribution. This was to be expected. I think the devs finally learned. Shout out to, I think, Kavayu was one of the main people from the modding community doing this. He was starting to adjust sheep spawns. They were always kind of centralized around your starting spawn, so you didn't lose the game based on sheep count. Seems like the devs are taking that to heart and engaging with that and adding it to more and more maps, which is always a positive, because I think at this point, there isn't a single person in AoE4 that hasn't felt like they got scammed at some point on the sheep they didn't find. New players coming in, new colors rather coming in is always cool, but I think a dark green is ambitious with the way maps are designed. Magenta is going to be an interesting one though for sure. And then we just got like improvements, right? So you got like faster exit from game, always nice to see. Lobby settings are now remembered. Finally, thank goodness. I've had to remake lobbies and change the settings again so many times. Villager drop off, they've actually added a new hotkey for that, which is nice to see. And then it's just this like quality of life stuff, right? Like finally you'll be able to see what tech's going to cost without being in game. But this is interesting to me. We've got more points of interest coming. These were introduced alongside the Knights Templar and House of Lancaster. And I personally was a very big fan, but the design needs to be adjusted. Otherwise, it becomes very one-dimensional when you figure it out. And we saw that with one of the maps that came with that previous DLC. But Herbalist Huts being a kind of healing point on the mid-map is intriguing, because now the idea with this that I really like is Herbalist Huts seem to be designed to reward people that are attacking and rebalance the distribution of attack versus defense, right? It's very hard to attack into someone. They have reinforcement advantage and the damage accrues over time. Now this kind of urges people to get out of the base, which is cool to see because I was a little bit worried we're going to start to creep back with other changes coming to like a TC boom or a fast castle full meta with not much else happening. This one is very curious. Ancient Steel increases the health of all current buildings and military units by 5%. It's pretty pricey. It takes a long time to tech, and it only affects things that are already alive. So this to me is basically a hyper late game stalemate point of interest. I think what they're trying to do is find ways to resolve the late game arriving and people just not budging so that you could stack up these techs because you control that area and all of a sudden you've got 50% more health on one big army. You feel like you're playing Order of the Dragon just with more pop. So outside that, they have changed building range indicators because we've always been going through this cycle of the squircle versus the circle, right? It's actually, it looks like a circle in your radiuses for buildings, but actually what's happening is it's more square based. You just can't see it. AI improvements, always cool to see. And then, what we're really going to get into is going to be done here. Just bugs being fixed. Yeah, some the really cool one here actually is the Forgotten Runes. The return to work used to always ungarrison the villager. That's now been fixed. And there was also an interesting little trick here. Sheep no longer can be assigned to building blueprints. So people would be able to drop a blueprint and the sheep couldn't be captured. This was very similar to the issue that HRE had in the early days where you could drop blueprints of buildings, i.e. not build them, and you could activate emergency repair, which was not a good thing. It had to be banned from competitive until it finally got fixed. And we'll go over this. There's some reworks coming in. The Wolf Den is an interesting one. So they've changed wolves now. I like this change. Anyone who's tried to use the Wolf Den point of interest hates it because although it's kind of hype in a competitive format, it's really annoying that who gets the gold comes down to just one button press at the very end. So they've altered it now so that the den itself is worth some gold, but the wolves make up the rest as well. So there is a point to it. Whereas before, what would happen on pro level is people would basically burn the wolf den down and run away. They'd ignore the wolves entirely. They would pull one spear to aggro all the wolves and just burn down the building, which is a little bit lame. Okay, now this is the big change that's kind of crazy to me. Town center cost reduced from 400 wood, 350 stone down to 400, 300. This is huge for one civ in particular. And anyone who used to like shooting deer knows where I'm going. Roos. Roos have a build, the Golden Gate build, 2TC, that was incredibly popular in the early days. And that was a big driver as to why the stone cost got changed. Because you would need 3 tickets instead of 2 out of your Golden Gate landmark. This change now puts Roos back on the menu, which in some ways is kind of fair. I don't think Roos was that dominant or desirable of a pick. So this gives them a bit of a refresh and a revitalize. But it's interesting that this comes in a way that combines the idea that they want people to move back towards 2TC. They just put one of the best civs at doing it without being punishable back on the menu because Roos will not need to touch stone at all. Palisade health being increased as well is another intriguing change. It seems like the devs are kind of trying to lean into defensive play being more rewarded with these changes. And I think also another part of it is trying to nerf knights, which you'll see in the upcoming piece, which is the spear wall cooldown has been heavily reduced. What you used to be able to do against knights is you could basically, you get baited into a brace and then they would recharge and then you just get hit and there was nothing you could do. Yeah, so this change in conjunction with the change to health and movement speed for spearmen in the Imperial Age, it all seems to be desiring this idea that like knights have become too effective at all stages and they want to try and do something against it. So, now it's a little bit harder for knights to breach through defensive wall play. Now it's going to be harder to bait and switch spearmen because they'll always be able to re-brace and make sure you can't charge them. I, for one, am okay with this. I think it's a little bit stupid the way knights acted. I was like, we either do this or we go in a direction where knights have to charge and cannot stop charging, which I think would be more annoying, actually, for players than this change. Outside that, Springles have been slightly adapted. They're no longer going to get blacksmith upgrades, so no +3 coming in there. And they have had their DPS slightly altered to kind of bounce through that. This is a big change. Men-at-Arms have been dead weight, and anyone who's an English main knows this, right? You might be able to make it work if you get late game English, but most civs just don't do Men-at-Arms anymore, even if you castle first, which was the one big reason to do Men-at-Arms. So they have reduced the cost from 100 food down to 90 food. We'll probably see a little bit of Men-at-Arms experimentation, especially when you consider the production rate. So now some of these fast castle builds actually could hit hard enough without you having to play HRE and go for a Burgrave. Outside that, just more things to remove the annoyance of the wolves coming through. And on top of that, healing. This is gonna impact a specific civ. So what they've done, they've changed it now so that being in combat doesn't require you to be attacking, it requires you to be attacked. That change is huge because what was happening before is IBID players in particular could chain heal their way through and greedily tech up, and it was so hard to kill any workers because of it. So that is a huge change in particular to these IBID Cambulance feudal into fast castle builds. I think they're one of the heaviest hit civs. And then you'll probably see the other one is going to be Delhi with the healing circle jerk, where all the scholars would frontline and they would just heal each other and they were buying an insane amount of time. So really cool change. Highly approve of that. And then Silk Bowstrings has been nerfed. Not really surprised. I feel like we've been seeing in the last year more Archer playing Imperial than we've ever in the history of the game. Hand cannons have kind of felt dead by comparison. So I think that was the idea is redial it back a little bit, especially in conjunction with you trying to buff Spearman, and maybe hand cannoneers as a side product comes back into the picture. All right, so this is the big one that most people are looking for. This is the one that we really will care about. Civ-specific changes. So, men-at-arms are being buffed across the board. This includes Golems. All the specific types are basically getting a food reduction of 10. So I'll just recap that quickly now because we'll go over it a lot as it continues through here. Outside that, it looks like we have just got some adaptations to Golden Age, having widgets so you can easily track what's happening. Manjaniques is an interesting change here. They have nerfed the incendiary projectiles, buffed the bonus damage, and then they reduced the splash. I'm not surprised by this. Anyone who's watched videos on my channel about Manjaniques has seen that they look like one of the most broken things to scale into. It's the Ibid's best strategy if they know they're going late game. If you're heading towards a 200 army pop and your opponent has got mostly infantry, Manjaniques break the game. Seen it time and time again. So their desire here, the devs are basically just trying to readjust this so the spread shouldn't be as wide on the incendiary shot, but it should be more damaging towards buildings. It should do its role. So what they're trying to do here is essentially force people to use rock form. Whether this is good enough, I'm not entirely sure. I think late game incendiary is still going to be best, but what this should at least do is slow down the snowball point where Ibids get to that third or fourth Manjanique, their catapult, and you just feel like the game is over. And in conjunction with the combat healing, Dervishes have also had their AoE heal retweaked so that it's nerfed down a little bit and scales up per age. Just great changes there. I think it needed to happen. Ibids only really cared about Cambulances. Byzantines obviously getting the Spearman change as well. Outside that, longbows have been nerfed. That's right, in terms of the pump rate. So, cost-wise, it hasn't really changed at all, but it's the fact that you get 4 out every X seconds instead of 5. That's really important because a lot of players were playing into longbows regardless, because the reality of longbows is, in most situations, it was the go-to answer. If you're going castle in particular, because of the way they bulk scale, they were too effective. So, great change there. In conjunction with that, Keshiks have also been buffed, less expensive. No surprise considering they come out in about 2% of games. And then just slight tweaks to Merc costs with Golems to reflect the men-at-arms change. This is a big one. They took Raw Cannon away from the Byzantines. I wasn't quite expecting that, but it does make sense. I think they just want to try and rebalance Hui Pal being used compared to Cannon, because I think Cannon just dominated 100%. Varangian buff is huge, by the way. 90 food down to 80 food. I think Varangian have a lot of impact situationally, and we've seen that with the Macedonians in particular, who also will receive this buff. I think you're going to be starting to see a lot more feudal men-at-arms cheeses, especially out of the Macedonians. Mango emplacements need to be nerfed. No surprise here. Like I've talked about time and time again on this channel, the best emplacement in the game. And outside that, some changes to the Romans that I don't think is going to change too much. Byzantine still doesn't really feel like a water sieve, and giving them a little slight increase in range of the Romans, I don't think is going to change that because of the way that water currently works. Outside that, just buffs to the other things, right? Like, so for example, now the mercenary Nesta Bees actually can get the buff barrels. So they, once again, it comes down to the idea that whenever people were building that landmark, they were only building cannons, really. Like 90% of the time, it was raw cannons. So they're going out of their way to just try and recalibrate that a bit. And they've just fixed issues, which was making camel riders not affected by camel handling, which always surprised me. We might see camel spam as a viable strategy in certain matchups of Byzantine's late game now. Just because once you've got all the olive oil rolling, the impact of camels, like as a one unit entity, is super impactful against any of these knight heavy civs like French, for example. Outside that, China has had the... Is it an exploit? I feel like most people felt it was an exploit. Nerfed. You used to be able to, with villagers, drop off one resource and get one tax. It's now been changed so it's an 8% raw of the total drop off and it tracks that accurately. Thank God, this is very exploitable to get insanely fast tech timings out of China into feudal and beyond, which shouldn't have been happening in the first place. Fire Lancer buffs coming in, Palace Guard buffs coming in. I mean, Fire Lancers has been a dead unit for a long time. I don't think this is going to change it still, but situationally, it might have a little bit of validity. Just makes them a little bit better as raiders, I guess, into killing workers. And Grenadiers getting a buff is always nice to see because Grenadiers haven't really been part of the meta over 2 years. And even then, it was like free for alls. Delhi, Tower of Victory now works correctly. So I'm hoping we get a big change here because Dome of Faith has been dominating, but this change would put Tower of Victory back on the menu. When you consider they are saying here that it averaged about a 5% increase to attack speed, an extra 15% is kind of nuts. You're now feeling like an English player on the go. So Delhi, we might see them start shifting towards Archer Spears, especially with the buffs that are coming down the line with the Spearmen, with the improved brace. So it's very hard to bait them ever, even things like Ghazi. All right, looks like we had a little technical issue back again. So with English, now this is interesting, right? It looks like they received a nerf on the call to arms production, but they didn't. Because they improved the overarching men at arms production, they've just had to reduce that to kind of compensate. So you're still going to have a big edge there as English in a meta that actually finally could be good for men at arms. I love these changes overall, though. Like King's Pass now producing villages 10% faster, White Tower Garrison getting nerfed. The whole goal seems to be to pull people away from 2TC Fast Castle, which has been the only reliable way English has found relevance on land maps. This seems targeted at maybe getting a bit more feudal presence into eventual Castle Age with a real choice here compared to White Tower just being way too good. And with the cheaper TCs, there is still the potential that people go towards that. But I do like that they're trying to find a way to get English back in without breaking the meta in a boring way. Next up is French. I find this fascinating. Free traders spawned from the Chamber of Commerce now instantly. This is a huge buff of tempo to the start of your feudal age. It used to be that you would kick up a tech up, you could have forestry and wheelbarrow research before hitting feudal, and then you'd have to wait, I think it's like 25, 30, 40 seconds to get those two traders. Now you get them instantly. That is huge because it means you should be able to get the first trade in, possibly the second even, before your opponent can get any harassment. This may end up being quite snowbally for French, but remember, they're giving up the production rate on knights for that. This just allows them to pad themselves to get knights still. So huge change there, 100% required. I think we're seeing this idea of trying to eke trade back into the meta just ever so slightly. Now, this one surprised me. Golden Horde received nerfs, and you're probably wondering why. Based on tournament results, they haven't been looking overwhelming, but when you look at the ladder, look at Conk, you get the same feeling. Golden Horde, they're down here. They're trash. They're like a bottom 7 in Conk. But when you look outside at the wider player base, they're second. I think Golden Horde got nerfed because similar to Order of the Dragon, these very tanky units, in the case of them heavy cavalry Torgud, are overwhelmingly difficult for low-ranking players to deal with, and it just leads to big stomps, right? Same why Macedonians is dominating up here as well. Same why Order of the Dragon is still a top 5 civ at all ranks. That's why we're seeing them nerf the production rate with Production Edict, the starting wood, the amount of stone they generate, just a lot of nerfs overall across the board. Does suck a little bit for comp and pro play. I think they were already kind of situational pick. You couldn't just broadly open and feel great about the pick. Now it feels like they've been kicked in the nuts twice. I think what will happen here is Golden Horde will start to rot down towards like B, C tier in pro play, but still be kind of bullyish on higher ranks. And what will end up happening is the devs will have to relook at how Torgud function and then buff elsewhere. The reality is they just buff spears. So I actually think the issue of heavy cavalry might already be padded enough that these changes feel like a mistake. Like Golden Horde to me is the big surprise hit with a nerf stick of this entire thing. But Landsknecht changes, always great to see. Landsknecht, they're already super situational. You very rarely see them. They look epic when they come out. I love any small thing we can do to give them a bit more sprinkling of relevance, even if it is situational. In other news, House of Lancaster has received some buffs, but this still feels like a shadow of its former self since the mana changes. Manas are now 50 wood cheaper, which is great. They need that for the early ramp up, as well as the Men at Arms buff that basically everyone else has had. The interesting thing actually is the King's College. They did finally buff the King's College discount, but overall this still feels like one of the worst landmarks in the game because of the civ it's on in its situation. King's College is really cool with the old manors when you scaled them up because you could afford things, but now it feels too pricey, especially ever since they nerfed the situational techs, which were good, which was the Hobbler tech, as well as the Knights getting bonus versus heavy. Other thing is Lancaster Castle. This has been a dead landmark. They've made a slight attempt to revitalize it by buffing each of the spawns. I would be surprised if this changes anything. Maybe there's some sort of pocket strategy, but reliably across the board, you're probably still looking at a situation where the only real way to play Lancaster right now is via the Lords that give that huge health buff and healing in the feudal age. Next up, we got Japan. Japan did receive the buff around Samurai, similar to the Footmen, the other civs. But they did, of course, receive a substantial nerf here. Finally, and I can't believe it took this long, the deflective armor has been nerfed for Mad Samurai. Almost double the time for it to replenish when out of combat. This is huge. A big problem you ran into with Mad Samurai, you couldn't outknight them, very hard to chase. If you chased after them, what often happened is they would just wait the 8 seconds, get a full buff of deflective, and then charge onto you. Because remember, deflective would offset one instance of ranged or melee damage regardless of how big that number was, meaning you could deflect away 60 damage that you should have been struck with, and was quite often what was happening. So high micro players were flooring people with this. Outside that, just a few buffs and tweaks, or not buffs, should we say fixes. The other one is that they have buffed Temple of Equality. 5 Mountain Ministries is now there immediately. This is the tech that allows the building, the monasteries, to debuff nearby enemies with the Sohai Sutra that minuses 50% damage. This is a cute detail. It doesn't really change the landmark in my eyes. I think it's simply going to mean that people might be more inclined to build it towards Order of the Dragon than they already were, which was the only real situation where it felt super good. So yeah, unless they want to change the way that Sohai Sutra works so that monks don't debuff the same enemy, I think you're always going to run into the same issue with this. The problem is if the monks did debuff different enemies, 50% damage loss is insane. And quite frankly, it would go from trash to god tier with just that slight tweak. But I don't think the devs want to do that because Japan is fine as it is. And next up, Jean d'Arc. I don't get it, man. How are we still not getting this rework? We've been waiting so long and we have to keep waiting. I feel like we're getting baited every single patch. They have, of course, added the Chamber of Commerce change and Jean's champions a little bit cheaper to make up for the Men at Arms change. But I think Jean just needs her own stuff, her real own stuff. She's still just a Warcraft add-on piece without a real Civ identity around it. It's time for that change to come. I'm really hoping it's going to be before the next DLC because we have to wait half a year to finally realize that change. I mean, this was the time. We've literally got a DLC that is one civilization added to the game. This was prime real estate to make sure that Jean d'Arc change was in there. I'm a little bit heartbroken. It's still Knights Templar is an interesting change as well. Condottiero received an improvement on the damage reduction against gunpowder units, which, considering how rarely we see gunpowder units, shouldn't really change anything. The other part I find funny about this is like Condottiero, if you have lots of gold and nothing else, were always a great choice in Imperial anyway. That being said, Poland's still too good. Poland is still going to make up probably the majority of Knights Templar games. I think there are situations where Condottiero are underrated, though, just because they simply only cost gold. Like, here, I'll show you guys the stats so you can just remind yourself. Like, they're actually a surprisingly decent unit for what they cost. So, yeah, 120 gold, 195 HP, 2 melee armor, 3 ranged armor. They move very fast at 1.44, and their damage is base 16. Decent, really, right? It's a gold only men at arms in a way. But we'll see if we get a little bit more play there. My instinct is that it's still going to be too good to play into the Knights with Poland. Macedonians, they've had the same Royal Cannon treatment with the Foreign Engineering Company. Varangian have received that buff. I think this is going to be huge, by the way. They have reduced the health slightly on Varangian Guard, but the fact that more cost efficient and lean on a civ that struggles with economy is a big deal. So expect to see more Macedonian players trying to cheese you with feudal age men at arms rushes. Sorry. And Radari receiving nerfs, much needed. Starting to get there. I think Radari probably like one more tweak away from being in good position. And then we also have got nerfs to all the Hippodrome champions and their health being reduced. Overall, my feeling here is like this is moving things in the right direction, but my concern is we're now approaching the point where this Civ doesn't have much. What I mean by that is if they get late game, sure, they've got some cool strats, but their economy is still a big question mark. And I think we're probably going to see one more round of nerfs accompanied by some eco buffs to give Macedonians a bit of flexibility on the direction. Malians, they have received a slight buff, like everyone else, to the TC cost. I always like the idea of the town center 2TC Malian build, actually, especially with the Saharan trade network to defend you. I think maybe we'll see a few more players experimenting with it. It's not a bad idea, and especially with the buffs to walls and more civs being likely to do 2TC, I think we might begin to see Malian players shifting into that more regularly. Outside that, Farumba has had a huge change. Farimba, that used to feel like the one punch and done, has been buffed big time. This is probably, I think, the single biggest change Civ specific in the entire patch notes. Farimba now allows you to enlist all the upgrades, the Mansa Musafari, the Mansa Javelineers, the Mansa Freeborn. You do have to pay for them, but this is worth it. You now have real combos. You could go Javelineer to begin with and then buy into Mansa Musafari, which are an insanely effective front line. Add in the fact now that import armors has been nerfed, and I think we're going to see a bit more infantry play, maybe some 2TC into Frimba on the horizon, not too far off, which I'm weirdly excited for. And then, of course, to support that idea, ranches have been nerfed a little bit, 25 more wood. Outside that, Mongols received the same wood buff to their TC cost. The Karganet has been nerfed, which is a bit weird to me. I mean, this is a good change. Hui Power Nesta Bees being less likely to spawn. I say that, some people really like the Nesta Bees. I think the problem here is they just saw that everyone would always go Karganet. No one was doing White Stupa anymore, which is weird. Mongols have been probably the biggest extreme of this or that out of most civs in Age of Empires 4 when it comes to tier 4 landmarks. So don't know if this is going to be enough to push people back towards White Stupa, but we're heading into more of an eco macro phase of the game where we're seeing a lot more booming versus attacking. That actually would value White Stupa higher. And then there's that Gilderman arms chain. Dude, guys, I honestly think Order the Dragon are just going to be even worse for low rank players now. Like this being cheaper, because this is the thing. Like, what if you think about what's been buffed is the cost of men at arms? Jesus, really? And Order the Dragon has one of the most effective. They have reduced the health slightly, which is nice to see. But I think you're just going to see an increase in win rate for Order the Dragon in the upcoming patch. You can see they're already pretty high up there. It's only going to get better for them. So, Ottomans did receive some interesting changes. Sipahi have received a slight nerf. I don't think this changes too much. They're still the best light cav in the game. It's only a 10% reduction on their attack speed. What's interesting is this. Seagate Castle now increases the damage of all defensive structures. And they've buffed Imperial Palace alongside it. I think they're working really hard to try and get trade back into the meta, and Ottomans might be one of the leaders of the pack to do that. Still hard to justify because even though they've nursed Instable Observatory down here, it's still great. Like 100% to 90%, that's still incredibly valuable. Whereas Seagate Castle's real value is, are you already trading? The defensive structures is cool though. Like if you're a Tartly player, this now does seem sort of viable, but I still expect most people to be playing Observatory for the months to come. The big change to me, outside of the Imperial Palace getting a cool buff now that having more points, is the Kinji. They moved that to tier 1, and they moved Anatolian Hills that gives you sheep to tier 2. Great change. Anatolian Hills was probably by far the most sought after and used vizier point in the entire game. It gives you sheep and it gives you mining rate. It's just a dead brain obvious one, right? Especially when you consider at the highest level, who runs out of sheep first is usually those who lose. A Kinji move to tier 1, even though you only get 1 instead of 3 for free now, it means that you can actually consider a strategy around that. Like, imagine playing Mongols and only getting access to Magadai 5 minutes into Feudal Age. You're probably never building Magadai unless you go all the way to Imperial. And that was the problem with Akinji. By the time you had access to them, the scale point kind of had passed. It was very hard to justify them at that phase, especially with their costs. So, cool change overall. And then just some improvements around the cost siege workshops. Like, yeah, I think they haven't ultimately nerfed what makes Ottomans great. Ottomans is great because of their feudal ramp up, and that remains the same. So I don't foresee Ottoman pick rates declining. I think they're going to remain just as dominant, especially in pro play. Rus did receive some buffs around Abbey Trinity costs. They also have done this. Kremlin. Now when you go Castle Age, you spawn militia hand cannoneers. And of course, they received the Palisade health improvement because everyone else did as well. Honestly, I think Rus is back on the menu, boys. I don't think you need a Kremlin, but I think it's not even these changes. It's legitimately just a change around the cost of TC and the fact that it looks like we're moving to a bit more 2TC viability that's going to put Rus back in the agenda. So, Mark that in your books. On top of that, Sengoku will receive some interesting nerfs, finally. Survival techniques not being there for free. I don't know why it ever was. They've also seen increase in cost towards their mounted samurai, and they also have received some cost reductions here for the samurai bow upgrades. In fairness, samurai bow, the one that allowed samurai to shoot a Yumi bow, wasn't that popular anyway, from what I was seeing, because men at arms aren't. So I think this is just another desirable little detail where they're like, okay, let's shift them away from a cavalry civ. Can we make them an infantry civ? Because this civ has basically been a cav civ from start to finish. Outside that, same deflective armor, nerfs coming through, and then I think that was about it, yeah. Oh yeah, I don't know how that would happen. Ikko Ikki monks were applying so high sutra. So just bug fixes. I don't think this is gonna be enough on its own. I think Sengoku's still pretty strong, but where it could be the desirable change is if we do arrive back in that 2TC meta. It's like I don't want to say that Sengoku can't 2TC. They definitely can. But I think where they get the boost of value is the fact that when everyone's playing 1TC, they get all this passive food income alongside it. Toot boys. The Tuklak, the worker elephants, have now just been tweaked so they're less annoying with return to work. Ballista elephants have been buffed. This should not change anything. The Ballista elephants, if you guys have not tried them, they're very tanky, yes, but their DPS isn't worth the cost, and this doesn't really change that. +1 isn't going to move the needle in my eyes. They're still going to be a dead unit. Docks just being tweaks. They can no longer garrison monks because they're not the Delhi. And Amir warriors have finally been nerfed. The most cheesy of cheese. The Castle Rush build where they dropped a keep in your base and chose the free warriors that would spawn has been nerfed now. So with this change, this one in particular, the armor being reduced from 5 to 3 is absolutely huge and needed. It means that people can't just drop a castle in your base and feudal and end the game because you've got 5 armor men at arms diving your base that cost your opponent nothing. So great change there. And then this is one of the biggest. Shushi have the same tax change, but if we go down, it's this. Reworks the feudal landmarks, which has been so long overdue. Jiangnan Tower now works differently. It's not going to produce a unit when you place a building. It's going to be that you place buildings around it, and when you spawn units out of them, after X amount, you're going to get an army. I don't know what that army is going to be yet. I haven't seen it. But I like this change because Yangnan just felt like a meme build. I still remember watching a guy build 50 Raxes and 50 stables to build an army. And it's cute, but obviously not very effective. And the other one is Meditation Garden. So what they've done now is Meditation Garden will check all the resources in range and increase their deposits to a maximum of 60%. And then after that, it will give you the passive resource. This is pretty cool, actually. So there's like some strategies to maybe like get into here of dropping your Meditation Garden wider to expand there later. Maybe with a 2TC build. And then you have this huge bulk of resources like berries being buffed up by 60% is incredible. That's going to be an extra 200 food on like every vine, right? Or sorry, like 125, 130 extra food on every vine. So you're basically Ibids then. I don't think it's going to affect deer and boar. It never did. Probably shouldn't because boar getting 60% extra would be broken. But I like this change overall. I think it's another step in the right direction of let's cut back the amount of passive income in the game because it can be frustrating. Yes, it still comes around, but it comes around much later. And this now gives you a real choice with Meditation Garden. Like you can strategically think, what can I do in the mid game? Will I control the map? And if I do, it's probably worth dropping a Meditation Garden in a more aggressive location where I'll get more resources. A perfect example is Rocky River, where you could get 3 batches of berries and a gold in range, which was crazy. Outside that, we finally had this fixed, right? Sushi fishing ships would not generate taxes when... Oh, no, sorry. I read that wrong. So the thing I was checking for is to this day, you've been able to drop off fish at a mill and it'll be supervisable and generate tax. And that still seems to be the case for China and sushi. But that is gonna cover it, guys. So yeah, we spent quite a while on this. Hopefully you guys like the insights. Let me know what you think. What's the biggest change in your eyes? Like for me, realistically, I think that the overall change for TC cost is going to be a huge buffer to Roos. Specifically Civ-wise, I think probably the number one change, or rather number one Civ change is Malians. Malians that was already a pretty dominant Civ, I don't feel like they got nerfed. The ranch cost is a little bit annoying, but overall it feels like buffs are all around and more strategies on the horizon, which is a weird choice and direction for the devs to go in when you consider how good Malians already are. But at the end of the day, we do have to remember there is going to be a brand new Civ added. So regardless of how OP Malians are meant to be, in the end, It might just simply be Yufei back on top. Let me know what you guys think of the comments, and I'll catch you all in the next chapter.